subscribe.
"178 Valence Road was a terraced house with 2 rooms, a kitchen and a scullery downstairs, and an outside loo. Upstairs there were 3 rooms, and out of 2 of them we could see the trains thundering along a raised track between Liverpool Street and Bethnal Green stations. When we moved in, late that summer of 1939, it was just a humble East End house, but it was not long before Mum made it into a warm, happy and secure home. Mum made sure all our clothes were always the cleanest by washing them every day, and the old man even cleaned and ironed the laces on our boxing boots. Mum didn't come upstairs much except to bring the boys tea and sandwiches, but as long as no one was getting hurt, she didn't mind all the noise and running around. She loved having kids in the house, and the Kray home got a reputation for always being full up. A year later, the twins showed so much promise that I took them to the Robert Browning Institute in Walworth, near the Elephant and Castle in South London. One of the resident trainers watched them in the ring with a look of amazement on his face. "How old did you say they were, Charlie?" he asked. 10, I said. "Are you sure they haven't been in the ring before?" "Absolutely not," I replied proudly. "They're amazing," the trainer said, "bloody amazing." "So you want them in the club?" he asked. "Definitely," I replied. And so the short-lived but sensational career of the young Kray twins was born. Reggie was the skillful boxer. Ronnie was the fighter who never knew when he was beaten. The twins only fought each other once. For 3 2-minute rounds, they were totally absorbed, both committed to winning. They were belting each other so hard and so often that Mum and the old man wanted to get in the ring and stop it, and it was all I could do to restrain them, although the battle got so bloody in the final round that I nearly shouted "stop" myself. The judges found it difficult telling the twins apart in the first part of the fight, but they had no trouble towards the end. Ronnie's face was a mess, and Reggie got a unanimous verdict. Afterwards, in the dressing room, Mum laid into them. She was horrified at the sight of her 2 babies knocking the daylights out of each other, and told them in no uncertain terms that they would never appear together in a boxing ring again as long as she was alive. The twins burst into tears, but they never did fight each other again. As they grew up in the following years, a myth got growing throughout the East End about the twins. They were tough and fearless, and in the tradition of the Wild West, where the fastest guns were always the target of other sharpshooters, they became marked young men in the East End. Hard nuts from neighbouring districts came looking for them in search of fame and glory, wanting to be the people who toppled the Krays. Like the police, they came mob-handed, but they never came back. One evening, Reggie walked into the house at just after 10 at night. I told him Ronnie had left a message saying he was in the Coach and Horses with his friend Pat Butler. It was nearly closing time, and I said it was a bit late to go, but Reggie had a strange feeling he ought to. He left quickly. What happened when he got there became the talk of the East End for months. Ronnie was in the saloon bar with Pat. As Reggie walked in, Ronnie said, "Just in time." He nodded to 9 youths at the other end of the bar. "That little firm are looking for us." A few minutes later, the twins told Pat to make sure he stayed out of the way, then dashed out of the door, as though they were scared. But it was only a ploy to reduce the odds a little. As 4 of the rival gang followed them into the street, the twins doubled back into the saloon, through the public bar, taking the remaining 5 by surprise. It was an almighty battle. Fists flew, chairs were thrown, tables overturned. Although the twins were outnumbered by more than 2 to 1, they floored the whole lot. And when the other 4 ran back in, they knocked them out too. Amazingly, the twins came out of that scrap virtually unscathed, but one of the kids Bill Donovan, who Ronnie had hit with a chair, was taken to hospital with a badly damaged eye. The twins were very concerned about Bill and asked me to ring the hospital. I pretended to be a relation and asked how he was. A nurse said he was stable, but nobody knew if the eye was going to be permanently damaged. It was a worrying few days. The twins kept telling me to ring, and eventually, to the twins' relief, we learned Donovan was going to be all right. Pat Butler told me later that he was in the street after the fight had ended, and an old man had asked him who the twins were. He'd never seen anything like it. It was like a scene from a Western. One night, a few weeks later, the twins were spotted going into a cafe in Commercial Road. When they came out, they found themselves facing 10 members of the so-called Watney Street gang who, it seemed, were intent on teaching them to stay in Bethnal Green. The twins did not want to risk waiting for the usual preliminaries to a punch-up. They waded into the mob, laying 6 of them out on the pavement. The rest, not fancying the new odds, ran off. Incidents like this built up the legend that the twins were tough guys who went around the East End looking for people to punch. That is far-fetched and unfair. What is true is that they were tasting power for the first time. They had been accustomed to victory in the ring against one opponent, but now they knew they were hard and tough and skillful enough to take on and beat 8 or 9 between them, and they enjoyed the feeling. The Albert Hall was packed that night on the 11th of December, 1951. Tommy McGovern, one of my contemporaries at the Robert Browning Institute, was defending his British light heavyweight championship, and 5 of the other 7 bouts involved Bethnal Green fighters, including the 3 Kray brothers. It was the first time we had appeared on the same bill together, and it was to be the last. In those days, a boxer had really arrived when he appeared at the Albert Hall or Haringey Arena. It had taken me 18 victories in 20 contests, but the twins who had turned pro in July had made it there after just 6 fights and 6 wins. That's still a British boxing record. My appearance almost never happened. I had decided to quit boxing and hadn't been in the ring for several months, but I wanted an extra bit of money for Christmas and agreed to take on an unbeaten Aldgate welterweight called Lou Lazar for 25 quid. We were the first 3 fights on. First, Ronnie lost to a clever boxer from King's Cross named Bill Sliney, whom Reggie had outpointed 2 months before. Sliney was not too keen to continue after a first-round mauling by Ronnie, but he was persuaded to and won a points verdict. Reggie's cool, scientific style earned him an easy points win over Bob Manito of Clapham, and then it was my turn. Unfortunately, it was a night when the deafening cheers of the Bethnal Green faithful could not help me. I'd been out of action too long, and my timing was haywire. My pride got me to my feet after 2 counts of 9 in the first 2 rounds, but a left hook in the guts finished me in the 3rd. I spent some of the 25 quid on a white fur coat for my baby son Gary, who had been born 2 days after the twins turned pro, but it was my last boxing payday. I never put the gloves on in public again, and neither did the twins. My brothers could have made a living out of boxing. They were both above average, particularly Reggie, and I'm sure they could have earned a few bob. I'd seen what boxing in the forces had done for me, and I'd urged them to give it a go in the army when they got called up for national service. But as usual, the twins felt they knew best. When they found themselves back in Civvy Street after being dishonorably discharged, Ronnie had lost interest in fighting, and Reggie used the excuse that he would not get a license because of his army record. He did train with me though, and the fitter he became, the more he felt he would like to box professionally. Finally, he did apply for his license. However, a previous conviction for assault was on his record, and he was worried it would go against him. Thankfully, the assaulted victim wrote to the boxing board explaining that Reggie's assault was only after much provocation and he should be allowed another chance. That letter swayed the decision in Reggie's favour and he was granted his licence. But within a few months, he had lost all interest in the sport. He felt that all the managers and agents were too ruthless and only wanted to know those fighters who were going to become champions. The irony was that Reggie was good enough to become a champion. I didn't doubt that for one moment, but he didn't like the atmosphere, and that was the end of that. Reggie never went in the ring again, although I believe he knew in his heart that he was good enough. It quickly became clear that the twins were not cut out for a life on the knocker like our dad. I lent them some money, and they did spend several weeks trying to generate some business, but they were always looking for something else. That something else came in the form of a filthy, neglected billiard hall in what had once been a small cinema in Eric Street off the Mile End Road. The takings were low, mainly because the manager preferred playing snooker himself rather than encouraging business. But the twins saw the potential and put a proposition to the owner. They would take over the place, smarten it up, and make it pay. In return, they would give him a weekly cut of the takings. Over the next 18 months, the Regal Billiard Hall became more and more popular. The twins ensured there were no fights or disorders of any kind that might bother the police, and the business still made money. Inevitably, though, it became a meeting place for thieves, where robberies were planned. The twins were never involved, but if any of the pals they helped out had a good tickle, I'm sure the twins made sure their debts were repaid with interest. I'd always settled disputes with words, not fists, and up to the day we opened the Double R, I'd never had a fight outside the ring. I had had arguments with the twins over this when they resorted to violence. I told them they should not get involved in fights, but they would sneer and say I had no idea what was going on, what it was like when someone was spoiling your business. I found myself taking a different view when the troublemakers started getting busy at the Double R. After all the hard work that had gone into transforming that Bow Roadhouse, I was damned if I was going to stand by and watch some mindless Jack the Lads ruin the venture before it had properly started. So, when there was no other way out, I met violence with violence. I spoke to the idiots in the language they understood, and, since I was fit and technically well equipped, I was able to handle myself more than adequately. Reggie was amused and quietly pleased by my attitude. The afternoons were worst. If there was going to be trouble, that was the time. I had asked Dolly to stay away during the day, but one afternoon she came in for something. 3 blokes were drinking at the bar and one said, "Hello, darling." I let that pass because I was all for being friendly, but then they all started making stupid, unsubtle remarks, generally being leery and showing a lack of respect to a woman. I was serving behind the bar and politely asked them to be quiet because Dolly was my wife. Unfortunately, they took no notice, and finally, I went around the other side of the bar to show them the door. One of them threw a punch, and before I knew it, I was having a row with all 3. Bill Donovan, who had been badly hurt in the Coach and Horses battle several years before, was on the door and helped me out. We finally sent the troublemakers on their way with a message not to come back. When Reggie heard about it, he said, "Now you know. Sometimes you've got to fight." I could not argue, but all the aggro got on my nerves and made me sick. I found it hard to understand the mentality of people who took a delight in smashing up something that was nice. We turned the room above the club into a gymnasium, and although I left it very late to ask him, Britain's favourite boxing champion Henry Cooper came along with his manager Jim Wicks to open it. This helped publicise the Double R, and more people came along to see what it was like. The message finally got home to the sort that took pleasure in trouble, and gradually the club became the sort of establishment we had wanted in the beginning. The twins attracted all sorts, good, bad, and indifferent. But everyone knew the rules and respected them. Some hard gangland men from South London crossed the water to drink there. They may have been enemies with some of the East End clientele, but after those first 6 months there was hardly any hint of bother. The Double R, it seemed, was a welcome neutral ground, a little Switzerland in the middle of Mile End. Reggie, who had a natural flair for mixing with all types, was the perfect host, and I ran the bar with Barry Clare, an engaging homosexual, who also doubled up as compere, calling up amateur talent from the customers. One night a lady asked Barry if she could sing a number. It was a beautiful blues song and she was so good, I asked her if she would come along and sing a couple of times a week. She was thrilled and said, "I'd be delighted." "How much do you want?" I asked. The lady laughed. "I don't want any money for singing." But I insisted, and she finally gave in to shut me up. I forget how much we agreed. It was probably a $5. After her first performance, I went up to her and tried to give her the money. She refused, but I forced her to take it. She had been excellent value and had earned it. She immediately went to the bar and put the money on the counter. "What are you doing?" I said. "You've paid me Charlie," she replied. "I can do what I like with my own money, and what I'd like to do is buy everyone a drink." And she did. Not just then, but every time she came in. She was a lovely woman who just loved to sing, and her name was Queenie Watts. For the rich and famous, the West End had always been the place for a night out. But in the middle 50s, the other side of the river became fashionable and wealthy. Titled gentlemen and show business stars, including Danny LaRue and Joan Collins' sister Jackie, started coming to the Double R. For me, the work was tiring, but it was our own business, and the financial rewards were worthwhile. Most of the time, too, I was meeting very nice, genuine people. It certainly beat life on the knocker. With business booming, Reggie and I decided to expand into gambling. At that time, it was illegal. Bookmakers were not turf accountants with shops in the high street like today. They operated on street corners, and anyone who wanted to put a couple of bob on a horse risked being nicked. Card games, too, were against the law. Anybody who wanted to play for money had to go to a spieler, a club, normally in a basement, where chemin de fer and poker were played away from the prying eyes of the police. Reggie and I saw the financial possibilities in spielers, and we acquired one across the road from the Double R. Within a couple of months, we opened 2 more. Money suddenly was coming out of our ears. To make life even sweeter, a member of the Double R tipped me off about an empty flat in Narrow Street in Wapping. It was a 2-bedroomed flat on the 2nd floor of a shabby block called Brightling Sea Buildings, built for dockers and their families nearly 100 years before. A palace it wasn't, but it was a place Dolly, Gary and I could call ours at last, and I snapped it up the same day. I had the money to move to a posher pad, away from the manor, but the thought didn't occur to me. The East End was in my blood, and anyway, that was where we were making a very good living. Dolly adored the new lifestyle. She had always dreamed of being rich, and now that there was a few bob around, she made the most of it, with lots of new clothes and regular hairdos. We went to West End clubs with upper crust patrons of the Double R, who accepted us as friends, Cockney accents and all, or we enjoyed ourselves with old friends in the East End. Wherever we went, Dolly always looked lovely and attracted a lot of attention. I was proud of her. One bloke at the Double R seemed to be taking more than a passing interest in Dolly, but I felt secure in our marriage and didn't think much of it. She was a stunning looker, and it was hardly surprising that other men found her attractive. My life was full to the brim with money and excitement and plans for the future. At this time, Ronnie was in Wandsworth prison, and he was delighted that business was going well on the outside. He knew he would have a share in it when he was released, and because he'd earned full remission through good behaviour in his first year, it seemed he would be home in time for Christmas 1958. In one day, however, the whole situation changed. From being more or less a model prisoner without one black mark on his record, Ronnie found himself in a tiny concrete cell in a straitjacket. Dreams of freedom vanished. The nightmare from which Ronnie never escaped had begun. During the year he'd been in jail, Ronnie had been a loner. He had had his place in the prison hierarchy and made sure everyone understood it. But he had made it plain that he wouldn't cause trouble if he wasn't bothered. Ronnie has an overpowering manner, bordering on hypnotic, and often sounds as though he's demanding, when in fact he's merely asking. Whether this led to the problems in Wandsworth, I don't know, but a prison officer reacted badly to something he said, and Ronnie snapped. The officer went down, but within seconds other officers were on Ronnie who, strong as a bull, chinned a couple more, and they went over. An almighty fight broke out with fists flying and boots going in. More officers, some armed with truncheons, joined in. Ronnie laid into them until they grabbed his arms and pushed them behind his back. Then they forced Ronnie's head down and rushed him along the cell corridor into a post. Someone came running with a straitjacket. Somehow they got Ronnie into it. Then they dragged him along to a concrete cell they called a chokey block. They held him down while an officer injected him with a drug, then slammed the door. Ronnie was left in that cell for a week. Then they transferred him to the psychiatric wing at Winchester Prison in Hampshire, and a doctor certified him insane. The family all reacted differently. I was very worried and disturbed because I realized the implications. Ronnie could be kept in jail indefinitely. Mum couldn't believe it, but she tried to keep cool about it and was as optimistic as usual, saying everything would be bound to sort itself out in the end. The old man wouldn't believe it. Ronnie was being clever, he said. He was getting the authorities at it, working his ticket. No way was Ronnie mad, he said. And Reggie, well, he was beside himself with fury and worry. If his identical twin, the man who shared his innermost thoughts, had been officially declared a nutcase, what on earth did that make him? The news from Winchester that spring of 1958 shattered us all, and for weeks we tried to change the prison rules that did not allow us to have a second opinion. Meanwhile, Ronnie was given massive doses of a tranquilizing drug called Stemetil. We were told this was to stabilize him and curb his violent tendencies. But it dulled his mind and affected his memory, and we were powerless to do anything about it. We watched him deteriorate before us to a point where sometimes he didn't even recognize us. Out of my mind with worry, I decided to find out just what Stemetil was. When I did, I was horrified. A Harley Street specialist confirmed that Ronnie was being treated for schizophrenia with a drug normally used for treating vertigo and vomiting. To make matters even worse, he said, the precise mechanisms of the action of this drug are not yet fully understood. It was too much to take. Reggie and I decided that Ronnie was coming out of Winchester, even if we had to blow a hole in the prison wall to get him. Happily, this wasn't necessary. A week or so later, in May 1958, Ronnie was transferred to a mental hospital just 14 miles from London. It was called Long Grove and was near Epsom in Surrey, and springing him from there was going to be a doddle. The strange case of the vanished twin hit the headlines later the same month. Millions probably thought it was just another piece of Kray skullduggery, another cheeky swipe at authority, but we removed Ronnie from that hospital because we were far from convinced of his unbalanced mind. Also, we were very concerned at the bad effect the drugs were having on him. One thing the drugs hadn't done was change Ronnie's appearance. He still looked like Reggie. When Reggie put on a blue suit, white shirt and blue tie, similar to those Ronnie wore in the hospital, only those who knew them well could spot the difference. When Reggie had his hair cut as short as Ronnie's and put on a pair of glasses, even I had trouble telling them apart. The switch was a simple operation. Leaving some friends in a couple of cars outside the hospital grounds, Reggie went in to see Ronnie as though it was just another routine visit. They sat chatting at a table in the small visiting hall and waited until a patrolling male nurse's back was turned. Ronnie whipped off his glasses, Reggie slipped his on. Then they quickly but discreetly changed places. When they were sure no one had noticed the changeover, Ronnie got up and sauntered over to a door which visitors were allowed to go through to fetch tea and biscuits. The nurse, assuming he was Reggie, opened the door and Ronnie walked out. But he didn't go for tea, he walked straight out of the hospital into the grounds. One of the hospital staff came towards him on a bike and Ronnie tensed. But the man merely nodded a greeting and rode past. Ronnie walked on and on until he reached the gate, and then he spotted the cars Reggie had told him about and he was gone. Reggie waited for about half an hour. Then he went up to the nurse on the door and said, "Excuse me, Ron's been a long time getting the tea. I didn't think they were allowed to get the tea." The nurse looked puzzled. "You're Ronnie," he said. Reggie shook his head. "I'm Reggie. Ronnie went to get the tea and I'm getting worried because he's not come back." The nurse stared at Reggie closely. He must have believed him because he ran off with a very worried look on his face. Then all hell broke loose. An alarm bell went off. Hospital staff started running around, and then the police arrived. Someone said to Reggie, "This is all down to you," but Reggie pleaded innocence. "I just came to see him. He went to get the tea, then everyone got excited." To confirm Reggie's story, the police took his fingerprints and checked them with the Criminal Records Office at Scotland Yard. "You are Reg Kray," someone commented. "That's what I've been trying to tell you for the last hour," replied Reg. Then he added, straight-faced, "I'm worried. What's happened to him? Do us a favour," one copper said, impatiently. "You know exactly what's happened to him." But Reggie kept saying he didn't, and they kept him there for a couple of hours before letting him go. Sometime later, the superintendent of Long Grove got in touch with us and asked us to see him at the hospital. He said we'd made a serious mistake. Ronnie wasn't well and should have stayed there for treatment. We played dumb, but the superintendent laughed. He said he admired how it had been done. There had been no trouble, and thankfully no one had been hurt. When it came to business matters, it was Reggie who had the better business brain. Ronnie, as generous and kind-hearted as ever, preferred to give money away. In those late 50s, lots of people were coming out of prison, and word soon got around that Ronnie Kray was a soft touch. People I'd never seen before would come into the club, and Ronnie would give them 50 quid out of the till. The next day, it would be someone else. It never seemed to stop. Reggie and I would get very uptight about it. We said we didn't mind helping people, but we had to draw the line somewhere. It didn't cut much ice with Ronnie. "What do you want to do? Show ourselves up," he said. "People come home expecting to be given something. Do you want us to get a bad name? Do you want people to think we're tight?" Reggie said, "We'd better slow down. That's all, we're overdoing it." Ronnie wouldn't have it. "You may think we are, but I don't. It's not going to change. That's how it's going to be." It was frustrating not being able to reason with Ronnie. I'm sure he thought there was a bottomless well of money he could dip into when he liked. And when there wasn't any there, he'd moan about it. One day, he came in for some for himself. The till was empty. "Where's the money?" he said, all surprised. "You've given it all away," I told him. "We have to do something," he said impatiently. "We've got to earn some money." "How can we?" I asked, pleased to make the point. "You give it away as fast as we can earn it." But it didn't make the slightest difference. In those days, when the average weekly wage was less than £10, our combined enterprises were bringing in around £200 a week. Ronnie continued to give away £20, £30 and £50 if he felt people needed it. Children, old people, families who were skint. Ronnie would help them all. But as usual, he did it all quietly, without fuss. He didn't want people to know. One day, however, his generosity was made public, much to Ronnie's embarrassment. Every Wednesday a show was put on for old people at Oxford House in Hackney. Ronnie took great delight in arranging for boxes of apples and pears to be sent over to them. This went on for several months, Then one night Ronnie delivered the boxes himself. The owner of the little theatre called out, "I'm on the stage." As Ronnie walked out, the man quickly pulled back the curtains, revealing scores of old ladies and gentlemen waiting for the show to start. He pointed to Ronnie and said, "I thought you'd like to know that this is the gentleman who sends the fruit." Then, to Ronnie's horror, he said, "Let's have 3 cheers for Ron." Ronnie blushed. He couldn't wait to get off that stage. If we had to pay a bill for, say, £100, Reggie or I would put the money away. But if someone came in and Ronnie felt they needed the money, he'd give it to them without thinking about it. Then later he'd start worrying about how the bill was going to be paid. If several people wanted help, Ronnie would go out of his way to help them all. Reggie was generous too, but he was sensible. He wouldn't leave us with no money for the bills. Money meant everything to Ronnie, but it also meant nothing. If he had £1 million, he wouldn't be happy until he'd given it all away. His charity didn't stop at cash handouts either. If a kid came into the billiard hall looking for a job, Ronnie would take him on, helping our old man behind the bar or cleaning the tables. We had all the staff we required, but Ronnie found it hard not to help someone if he felt they needed it. With him around, business was like a benevolent fund or welfare office, and one day I told Ronnie he'd missed his vocation in life. He'd have made a fantastic welfare officer. In one respect it was true. He was capable of so much patience with people. One of our customers had a sister who was very ill in a mental hospital, and Ronnie visited her a few times. He just sat talking and listening, trying to help her. Another customer had a sister who had become a drug addict and changed from a lovely girl into an old hag. Ronnie paid doctors a lot of money to try to help her, then bought her a hairdressing salon to give her an interest. Sadly, the girl was hooked for life and became a registered addict. But she appreciated Ronnie's help and wrote to a newspaper explaining what he'd done. When Ronnie learned that a certain bloke had ruined her life by forcing her to have drugs at a party, he smashed in the door of his home and gave him a hiding. Ronnie had this thing about the underdog, anyone underprivileged, weak, or in trouble. He loathed bullies and flamboyant, overpowering people who thought they were God's gift, and he couldn't stand blokes who took liberties either. Once, I was with him in a crowded pub when a cocky Irishman came in and ordered drinks all round. When he was asked for the money, he said he would pay the next day because he had none on him. Ronnie was fuming and laid the big Irishman out with a right to the jaw. I picked the guy up and took him outside. When I got back, Ronnie was still seething. "What a liberty," he said, walking in like that, then saying he'll pay when he feels like it. The irony is that if that arrogant Irishman had gone up to Ronnie and asked to borrow some money to buy a round, Ronnie would no doubt have given him some. Most of us, in a situation like that, would have felt like saying something to put the man in his place, but Ronnie had an abnormally quick temper. If someone did something he didn't like, he would see red and lash out. One night there were about 20 of us having a quiet drink in a pub when 2 guys came in and started staring at us. I asked the group if anyone knew who they were. No one did. I said that when I bought the next round, I'd go over and see if they said anything. A little while later I strolled over, unaware that Ronnie had followed me. I was ordering the drinks, waiting for the 2 blokes to say something, when there was a scuffle and they both ended up spark out on the floor. The governor looked at me stunned and said, "I don't know if I saw that or I didn't." Ronnie got the 2 guys to their feet and took them outside. When he came back, he said to the governor, "I didn't want you to have any bother in your pub." I told Ronnie I had gone over to see what was happening, but he said he knew what they were up to and didn't want any part of it. Strangers who took liberties were always in danger with Ronnie. People he knew were not. He'd bawl and shout at them, perhaps, but knock them up in the air never. For the next 6 months, money continued to flow in, despite Ronnie's philanthropy, and we lived well. We didn't have a lot of staff as such, but we did gather around us a number of loyal and trusted allies who looked after us and who, in turn, expected to be looked after themselves. My brothers had some good men around them. There was Big Pat Connolly, a huge happy man, who was the doorman at the Double R, Alf Limehouse Willie, who had a brain like a computer when it came to calculating gambling odds. Tommy Brown, a quiet and withdrawn but immensely strong man nicknamed the Bear of Tottenham. Billy Donovan, one of the hardest men I'd ever met. Big Albert Donahue, who looked after Reggie, and two lifelong close friends of the twins, Ian Barry and George Osborne. We had premises, clients and large sums of cash to protect, and these men helped us protect them. In the East End in those days there were firms and mobs. The mobs consisted of villains and thieves who specialised in robbery with violence. We were not the only firm operating in Bethnal Green, but we were the best organised and most successful. And because of that, the best known. Just as the twins had said they would not tolerate trouble in their clubs. They also made it plain they did not approve of rival spielers opening in their manor. If anyone did open one, the twins went along, said they felt it was a liberty, and asked for a percentage of the takings. It was not so much the money they wanted, they had enough interests of their own, it was the principle. They hated the idea of someone taking a liberty. Such was their reputation that they always got a share. But it wasn't always like that, because there was rarely any trouble in Kray premises. Spieler owners came to the twins asking them to be involved. It was a sensible, practical arrangement, and in most cases, they accepted the offers. Mum, as always, was the centre of our lives. And when Esmeralda's barn started lining our pockets, the twins and I were keen to give her everything she had ever wanted. She wanted very little. However, she certainly didn't want to leave Valence Road for a bigger house in a posher street. But she and the old man did not say no to holidays. They had never been further than Southend in Essex, and now there was some money around. They seized the chance to be more adventurous. Mum had had nothing for herself all her life, and I was thrilled to be able to give her a taste of the jet-set life. We went to Tangier, Italy, the south of France, and even lashed out on a wonderfully expensive cruise. It was lovely to see someone who had been nowhere suddenly going everywhere and enjoying every sun-soaked minute. Exotic places abroad were all very well for a couple of times a year, but we wanted to enjoy Steeple Bay, a nice little spot I had discovered near Burnham on Crouch, Essex. So I bought a caravan and a little motor cruiser, and I'd pop down there with Mum and the old man every weekend. They were blissfully happy times. The twins were very funny about me. Going away at weekends, they would say, "Going away again," leaving us to do all the work. We'd argue every weekend. They would call me a playboy, and it really got on my nerves. Then they would suddenly turn up in Steeple Bay with their mates. They always had loads of people with them. They attracted people all the time. Mum lapped up the good life at home too. Two good friends of ours, Alex Steen and his wife Anna, made a point of taking Mum to the Royal Command performance at the London Palladium every year, followed by a slap-up meal in a top restaurant. Mum always looked forward to that. It was all a dramatic change from the modest lifestyle Mum had previously enjoyed. But the money that was suddenly available did not change her one bit. Although she now mixed with dukes and duchesses, lords and ladies, she was always herself. She wasn't one for intellectual conversation, but what she had to say was said with a simple honesty that endeared her to everyone she met. The twins and I were proud of her. Ronnie and Reggie never put on airs and graces either. Far from being ashamed of where they came from, they were proud and took a delight in taking friends and business acquaintances home to meet Mum over a cup of tea in the upstairs sitting room. I was sitting in that room talking to Ronnie one day when the phone rang. It was Lord Effingham, whom we paid to sit on the board of the barn for prestige. When Ronnie put the phone down, he said the friendly peer had told him he needed £200 immediately. If he couldn't get it, he was going to kill himself. When Ronnie told me he was arranging for someone to deliver the money within an hour, I went spare. I said it was an obvious ploy to get money, and Ronnie was mad if he fell for it. But he would have none of it. He said he wouldn't be able to live with himself if something happened to Effingham. suppose I should not have been surprised. Nothing had changed. Ronnie had been a soft touch when he didn't have much money, and now that he had it coming out of his ears, he was even more charitable. I'm sure that the word went round London that if you were plausible, you could get anything out of Ronnie Kray. Lucien Freud, a heavy gambler, owed the club £1,400, and I told Ronnie that someone should speak to him about it. A few days later, he came up to me and said triumphantly, "It's all sorted out." Relieved, I asked, "Is he going to pay up?" "No." Ronnie replied, "I told him to forget it." I said, "What?" "We wanted to see him back in the club," said Ronnie casually. "It's better for us to have his custom." I tried telling him he had made a bad mistake, but Ronnie just said, "Don't go on about it. I've done it now." My dismay at his misguided generosity deepened a few days later when I learned that Freud had offered a very valuable painting as collateral for his debt, and Ronnie had turned it down. Neither the twins nor I were gamblers, but I do remember one night I tried my hand at Kemi and won £350. Well pleased with myself, I told Reggie, who immediately thought he'd have a go. I saw him about 2 hours later, and he was falling about laughing. "How much did you win?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, highly amused. "I did £750 in an hour." Reggie was not as careless with money as Ronnie, but when he had it, he was not afraid to spend it. So, there we are. That was a few stories from the Krays past. I hope some of you enjoyed them. My brothers weren't angels, everyone knows that, but they weren't as bad as some make out either. They had their good side, and it's only fair that that is known. We'll never see the like of them again.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please join our Facebook group. It's called Krays Crime Lords of London. We're a friendly moderated group with over 1,000 Kray and other celebrated gangster videos available for view. There's also thousands of images in the photos sections. The link for the group is in the YouTube description section. I hope we see you there soon.
Leave a like and subscribe.